What would you do if, the day you brought your new baby home, your husband handed you legal documents instead of flowers? Can love survive when trust shatters before the truth can even be proven? This is the story of how my husband's silence became his loudest answer, and how my whole world unraveled when he chose paperwork over forgiveness. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General's maternity ward buzzed overhead as I cradled my newborn son against my chest. Little Thomas had finally arrived after 18 grueling hours of labor, and despite my exhaustion, I couldn't help but smile at his perfect tiny features. His skin was a beautiful caramel tone, much darker than I had expected, but babies change so much in those first few weeks. "He's gorgeous, sweetheart," my mother Judith whispered, leaning over the hospital bed to stroke Thomas's cheek. "Look at those long eyelashes. He's going to be a heartbreaker." I glanced toward the door, waiting for Deacon to return with coffee. My husband had stepped out 20 minutes ago, claiming he needed caffeine, but I suspected he was making phone calls. The expression on his face when he first held Thomas had been complicated. Not the joy I had expected, but something closer to confusion. "Where did Deacon go?" asked Lorraine, my mother-in-law, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. She hadn't said much since arriving, just stood quietly in the corner, her hands clasped in front of her floral dress. "Getting coffee," I replied, adjusting Thomas's blanket. "You know how he gets when he's tired." The truth was, Deacon had barely spoken since the delivery. When Dr. Patterson placed Thomas in his arms for the first time, Deacon had stared at our son for a long moment before carefully handing him back to me. No tears of joy, no proud father declarations, just that strange, searching look. "He has your nose, Isolde," Judith said firmly, as if trying to convince herself. "And look at those fingers, definitely pianist hands like his daddy." I nodded, though privately I wasn't sure about the resemblance. Thomas looked different from what I had imagined during pregnancy. His features were beautiful but distinct, with a complexion that seemed to deepen by the hour. Genetics could be funny that way, I told myself. My great-grandmother had been Italian, and Deacon's family tree included some distant relatives from Spain. The door opened, and Deacon returned with 2 cups of coffee and his sister Abigail trailing behind him. Abigail worked as a nurse practitioner across town and had driven over as soon as she heard the news. "Let me see my new nephew," Abigail said, but her smile seemed forced as she approached the bed. She studied Thomas carefully, her medical training evident in the way she examined his features. He's beautiful, Isolde. Really unique looking." "Unique?" I laughed, though it came out sharper than intended. "He's perfect. All babies look different when they're first born." Deacon set the coffee on my bedside table without meeting my eyes. "The nurse said we can take him home tomorrow morning if everything checks out." "That's wonderful," Lorraine said quietly, though she hadn't moved closer to see the baby. "I should probably head home and let you all rest." "Mom, you just got here," Deacon protested, but Lorraine was already gathering her purse. "I'll come by the house in a few days," she said, kissing Deacon's cheek, "when everyone's more settled." After she left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Judith filled the quiet by cooing over Thomas, but I could feel the tension radiating from Deacon and Abigail. "So," Abigail said carefully, "the due date was pretty accurate, right? Thomas came right on time?" "Actually, he was a few days early," I replied, wondering why she was asking. "Dr. Patterson said that's completely normal for second pregnancies." Abigail nodded slowly. "And you've been feeling good throughout? No complications or concerns?" "Abigail," Deacon said sharply, "what are you getting at?" Nothing," she said quickly. "I'm just being a concerned aunt. It's what we do in the medical field. Ask lots of questions." But I could see something else in her expression. Suspicion, maybe, or professional curiosity that went beyond normal family interest. The way she kept looking between Thomas and Deacon made my stomach clench with unease. "I should probably feed him again," I said, hoping to change the subject. The lactation consultant said every 2 hours for the first few days. Of course, Judith said. Deacon, why don't you and Abigail go grab some real food? I'll stay with Isolde and help with the baby. Deacon hesitated, his phone buzzing in his pocket. He pulled it out, read something quickly, and typed a response. Actually, I think I'll stay here. Abigail, do you mind picking up some sandwiches from that deli down the street? Sure, Abigail said, though she looked like she wanted to say more. I'll be back in a bit. After she left, Deacon sat in the chair beside my bed, but he seemed distant, lost in thought. His phone buzzed again, and this time he stepped into the hallway to take the call. He's probably just overwhelmed, Judith said, noticing my concerned expression. Men handle these big life changes differently than we do. Give him time to adjust. But as I watched Deacon through the glass door, speaking in hushed tones to whoever was on the other end of the line, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The way he avoided looking at Thomas, the questions Abigail had asked, the strange tension that had settled over our family, it all pointed to something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. When Deacon returned, his face was pale, and his jaw was set in a way I recognized from our worst arguments. Who was that? I asked. Work, he said simply. Just some issues with the quarterly reports. But Deacon was a financial analyst, and I knew his work schedule better than anyone. No one called about quarterly reports at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, especially not when he had specifically taken paternity leave. As visiting hours wound down and the nurses began their evening rounds, I found myself studying Deacon's face for any sign of the joy I had expected to see. Instead, I saw something that made my heart race with panic. The careful, methodical expression he wore when he was solving complex problems at work. The same expression he had when he was gathering evidence. 3 weeks later, I returned to my job as office manager at Hartwell & Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm downtown. The transition back to work was harder than I had expected, partly because of the sleepless nights with Thomas, but mostly because of the growing tension at home. Deacon had been polite but distant since we brought Thomas home. He helped with feedings and diaper changes when asked, but there was no spontaneous bonding, no proud father moments. He seemed to be going through the motions of parenthood without any of the emotional connection. Isolde, my colleague Sandra rushed over as soon as I walked through the office doors. We've been dying to hear all about the baby. Do you have pictures? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the latest photos of Thomas. He was growing so quickly, his features becoming more defined each day. His skin had settled into a rich bronze tone that was undeniably beautiful, though still surprising given Deacon's pale complexion and my own fair skin. Oh my goodness, Sandra cooed. He's absolutely gorgeous. Look at those eyes. He's going to be such a heartbreaker. Other colleagues gathered around, offering congratulations and admiring the photos. But I noticed some exchanged glances, quick looks that they thought I couldn't see. The kind of looks that preceded whispered conversations by the coffee machine. He doesn't really look like Deacon, does he? Asked Jennifer from HR, her tone carefully neutral. Babies change so much in the first few months, I replied automatically. And genetics can be so unpredictable. My great-grandmother was Italian, you know. Of course, Jennifer said quickly. He's beautiful regardless. But the damage was done. I could practically hear the gears turning in everyone's minds, the calculations and comparisons they were making. By lunchtime, I was certain the entire office was talking about Thomas's appearance and what it might mean. I escaped to my office and closed the door, trying to focus on the stack of invoices that had accumulated during my maternity leave. But concentration was impossible when my phone kept buzzing with text messages. The first few were innocent enough. Congratulations from friends, offers to bring dinner, requests to visit and meet the baby. But then I saw a message from Lionel Carter, a colleague from the marketing department who worked on the 3rd floor. Heard you're back today. Coffee later. We should talk. My stomach dropped. Lionel and I had developed a close friendship over the past year, bonding over our shared frustration with office politics and our mutual love of old movies. The friendship had gradually become something more, though I had tried to keep things professional. But during those long evenings when Deacon worked late and I felt lonely and unappreciated, Lionel had been there to listen. It had only happened a few times. Drinks after work that turned into dinner, conversations that became too personal, moments of connection that crossed lines I shouldn't have crossed. Nothing serious, I told myself, just the kind of emotional affair that many married people experience when they feel neglected at home. But now, looking at Thomas's photos on my phone and thinking about the timeline, I felt sick with worry. I deleted Lionel's message without responding and tried to immerse myself in work, but the whispers followed me everywhere. In the break room, by the elevator, in the bathroom. People thought they were being subtle, but I could hear fragments of conversations that made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Doesn't look anything like. Wonder if Deacon knows. Feels so bad for him. By 3 o'clock, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things and told Jennifer I wasn't feeling well, which was true enough. The stress was making me nauseous, and I needed to get home to the safety of my own space. But when I pulled into our driveway, I saw Deacon's car already there. He wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 hours, which meant either he had left work early or he was taking longer lunch breaks than usual. Given his recent behavior, neither option seemed particularly good. I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch with his laptop open and papers spread across the coffee table. Thomas was napping in his bouncy seat nearby, looking peaceful and content. "You're home early," I said, setting down my purse. "So are you," Deacon replied without looking up from his screen. "How was your first day back?" "Fine," I lied. "Just tired. What are you working on?" "Research," he said simply. "What kind of research?" For the first time, Deacon looked directly at me. His expression was unreadable, but I could see something calculating in his eyes. "Just some personal financial planning, making sure all our accounts are properly organized." That seemed like an odd priority given everything else going on, but I didn't push the issue. Instead, I went to check on Thomas, who was starting to stir from his nap. As I lifted him from the bouncy seat, I caught sight of one of the papers on Deacon's coffee table. It wasn't financial planning documents. It was a printout of an email, though I couldn't read the details from where I stood. "I'm going to feed Thomas," I said, hoping Deacon would offer to help or at least show some interest in our son. "Okay," he said, already turning back to his laptop. The rest of the evening passed in tense quiet. We ate dinner while making small talk about work and Emily's upcoming school events, but the conversation felt forced and superficial. Deacon helped clean up the kitchen, then disappeared into his home office, claiming he had more research to finish. I spent the evening alone with Thomas, feeding him and reading stories to Emily before her bedtime. It was the kind of quiet family evening I had always imagined, but without Deacon's genuine participation, it felt hollow and sad. Later that night, as I was putting Thomas down for what I hoped would be a long sleep, I heard Deacon's phone ring in the other room. He answered quickly, his voice too low for me to make out the words, but the conversation lasted nearly an hour. When he finally came to bed, I pretended to be asleep, but I lay awake for hours, listening to his breathing and wondering what kind of research required so many phone calls and printed emails. The next morning, I woke to find Deacon already gone. He had left a note saying he had an early meeting, but when I called his office around noon, his assistant said he wouldn't be in until after lunch. That afternoon, Lionel appeared at my office door with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. "You look exhausted," he said, closing the door behind him. "Thanks," I said sarcastically. "That's exactly what every new mother wants to hear." "I'm serious, Isolde. Is everything okay at home? You seemed upset yesterday. And then you left early." I wanted to tell him everything. About the whispers, about Deacon's strange behavior, about the growing certainty that my marriage was falling apart. But instead, I just shook my head. "It's just the adjustment," I said. "New baby, back to work, you know how it is." Lionel sat down across from my desk, his expression serious. "People are talking, Isolde, about Thomas, about us. I think maybe we should—" "There is no us," I interrupted quickly. "We're colleagues and friends, that's all." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true, and from the look on Lionel's face, he knew it too. "Look," he said quietly, "I care about you, and I don't want to see you get hurt, but if Deacon is suspicious, if he's asking questions—" "He's not," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Lionel studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but if you need anything, you know where to find me." After he left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the photos of Thomas on my phone. His beautiful face looked back at me, innocent and perfect, and I felt a crushing weight of guilt and fear. Because deep down, I was starting to suspect that Deacon wasn't just being distant, he was building a case, and I was terrified of what he might find. 2 weeks later, I decided to host a family dinner. If people were going to whisper and speculate about our family, I reasoned, the best defense was to show them how strong and united we were. A nice evening with both sides of the family would demonstrate that Deacon and I were happy, that Thomas was a welcome addition to our lives, and that all the office gossip was just malicious speculation. I spent the entire Saturday preparing Deacon's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and homemade dinner rolls. The dining room table was set with our wedding china, and I had even picked up a bouquet of fresh flowers for the centerpiece. "This looks beautiful," my mother Judith said, as she arrived with a bottle of wine and a gift bag for Thomas. "You've really outdone yourself." "I wanted everything to be perfect," I replied, adjusting the napkins for the third time. "It's important for the family to see us all together, especially with all the changes lately." Deacon emerged from the kitchen carrying Emily, who was giggling at something he had whispered in her ear. For a moment, he looked like the man I had married, relaxed, affectionate, genuinely happy. But when his eyes met mine, the warmth disappeared. "What time are your mom and Abigail coming?" I asked. 7, he said, setting Emily down. "Mom said she might be a few minutes late." The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, and I opened it to find Lorraine and Abigail standing on the porch with matching expressions of polite reservation. They offered the appropriate greetings and compliments on the house, but I could feel their reluctance to be there. "Where's the guest of honor?" Abigail asked, looking around for Thomas. "Sleeping upstairs," I said, "but I'll bring him down after dinner so everyone can spend time with him." We gathered around the dining room table, and I served the salmon with what I hoped was confident grace. The conversation started safely enough. Emily's progress in first grade, Lorraine's garden club activities, Abigail's new apartment across town. But as the wine flowed and the evening progressed, the undercurrents became harder to ignore. "So, Thomas is what, 5 weeks old now?" Abigail asked, cutting her salmon into precise pieces. 6 weeks yesterday, I replied. "Time flies when you're not sleeping." "And he's healthy, meeting all his milestones." "Perfectly healthy," I said, wondering why she kept asking medical questions. "Dr. Patterson says he's developing beautifully." Deacon had been quiet throughout most of the meal, responding when spoken to, but not initiating any conversation. He pushed food around his plate more than he ate it, and I noticed he was on his second glass of wine, which was unusual for him. "You know," Judith said, clearly trying to lighten the mood, "Thomas has the most beautiful skin tone. So exotic and interesting. He's going to be such a striking young man." The word exotic hung in the air like a challenge. I saw Abigail and Lorraine exchange a quick glance, and Deacon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "All babies are beautiful," Lorraine said carefully. "Of course they are," Judith continued, oblivious to the tension. "But Thomas has such unique features. Very artistic looking, if you know what I mean." "Mum," I said quietly, hoping she would change the subject. But Judith was on a roll, the wine making her more talkative than usual. I was just telling my book club about him, and they're all dying to meet him. I showed them the photos, and they agreed he's just stunning. So different from what we expected, but in the most wonderful way. Different how? Abigail asked, her voice deceptively casual. Well, Judith gestured vaguely. The coloring, the features. Not what you'd expect from Deacon and Isolde, but genetics are so fascinating, aren't they? You never know what combinations you'll get. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily, sensing the adult tension, asked to be excused to watch television, and Deacon nodded his permission. Actually, Abigail said once Emily had left the room, I've been meaning to ask about the timeline. When exactly was Thomas conceived? Abigail, Lorraine warned quietly. No, it's a fair question, Abigail continued, her nurse practitioner training evident in her direct approach. I mean, if we're talking about genetics and unexpected combinations, it might help to know more about the timing. I felt my face flush with heat. I don't think that's appropriate dinner conversation. Why not? Abigail pressed. It's just family here. And if there are questions about paternity... There are no questions about paternity, I said firmly, my voice rising slightly. Thomas is Deacon's son, and I'm insulted that you would suggest otherwise. Deacon finally spoke, his voice eerily calm. Actually, I think the questions are reasonable. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my husband, unable to believe he was siding with his sister's obvious accusations. Excuse me, I managed to say. I said the questions are reasonable, Deacon repeated, meeting my eyes directly. Given the circumstances. What circumstances? Judith demanded, her maternal instincts kicking in. What are you people implying about my daughter? We're not implying anything, Lorraine said quietly. We're just concerned. Concerned about what? I stood up from the table, my hands shaking with anger and fear. Concerned that my son doesn't look exactly like his father. Concerned that genetics don't follow your narrow expectations. Isolde, Deacon said, still in that unnaturally calm voice, sit down. No, I will not sit down. I will not sit here and listen to my own family question my integrity and my son's legitimacy. Abigail leaned forward, her expression serious. Isolde, we're not trying to hurt you, but Deacon has been troubled lately. And when a baby looks so different from both parents... Different? I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. You mean darker. That's what you're really saying, isn't it? That Thomas is too dark to be Deacon's son. That's not... Lorraine started to say. Yes, it is, I interrupted. That's exactly what you're saying. And it's disgusting. In this day and age, to make assumptions based on skin color. It's not about skin color, Deacon said quietly. It's about honesty. The word hung between us like a sword. Honesty. As if I had been dishonest about something, as if I had betrayed him in some fundamental way. I have been nothing but honest with you, I said, my voice trembling. Deacon looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Not anger, not hurt, but a kind of resigned certainty that was somehow worse than both. Have you? He asked simply. The question was so loaded, so full of implications, that I couldn't form a response. Because the truth was, I hadn't been entirely honest. There had been the evenings with Lionel, the emotional intimacy that had crossed professional lines, the moments of connection that I had hidden from my husband. But that didn't mean Thomas wasn't Deacon's son. The timing was close, but not impossible. Genetics could be unpredictable. There were explanations that didn't involve infidelity. I think, Deacon said, standing up from the table, that this dinner is over. Deacon, his mother said softly, maybe we should all take a step back. No, he said firmly. I think we've all said enough for one evening. Abigail gathered her purse and kissed Deacon goodbye, whispering something in his ear that I couldn't hear. Lorraine hugged him tightly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she said to me as she headed for the door. "I'm sorry it's come to this." After they left, Judith helped me clear the table in tense silence. The beautiful dinner I had planned lay mostly uneaten, the flowers already beginning to wilt in their vase. "They're just jealous," Judith said finally. "Jealous that you have such a beautiful, unique baby. Don't let them get to you." But I could see the doubt in her eyes too, the questions she was afraid to ask. Deacon disappeared into his office without another word, leaving me alone with the dishes and the growing certainty that my carefully constructed life was falling apart. Later that night, as I fed Thomas in the quiet nursery, I whispered apologies to his sleeping face. Apologies for the tension, for the questions, for the family dinner that had become an interrogation. And deep down, apologies for the choices I had made that had led us to this moment. Because even though I wasn't ready to admit it, even to myself, I was beginning to suspect that Deacon's questions weren't unreasonable after all. The following Monday, I discovered that Deacon had changed all our banking passwords. I found out when I tried to log into our joint checking account to pay the monthly bills, only to be met with an invalid password message. After 3 failed attempts, the system locked me out entirely. "Deacon," I called from the home office, "did you change our banking password?" "Yes," he replied from the kitchen, his voice matter of fact. "Why?" "Security purposes." I walked into the kitchen where he was making coffee, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his carrier on the counter. Deacon looked tired but determined, like a man who had made difficult decisions and was prepared to see them through. "Can you give me the new password?" I asked. "I need to pay the electric bill." "I'll take care of it," he said without looking at me. "Deacon, that's ridiculous. I always handle the household bills. Just give me the password." He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. "I said I'll take care of it." Are you cutting off my access to our money?" "I'm managing our finances more carefully," he corrected. "There's a difference." But there wasn't a difference, and we both knew it. Deacon was systematically taking control of our shared resources, which meant he was either preparing for a separation or punishing me for something he suspected but couldn't prove. "This is financial abuse," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just lock me out of our own accounts." "I can, and I have," Deacon replied calmly. "Everything is still being paid. You're not being harmed financially. I'm just taking a more active role in our money management." I stared at him, this man I had been married to for 8 years, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The Deacon I knew was collaborative and trusting. This version was calculating and defensive. "Where are you getting legal advice?" I asked suddenly. Deacon paused in the middle of adding sugar to his coffee. "What makes you think I'm getting legal advice?" "Because you're acting like someone who's been coached on asset protection." He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Maybe I'm just being more careful about protecting our family's interests." That afternoon, I called my friend Rebecca, who worked as a paralegal downtown. We met for coffee at a cafe near her office, and I tried to explain the situation without revealing too many details. "He changed the banking passwords and won't give them to me," I said. "Is that legal?" "Technically, if both names are on the account, either party can make changes," Rebecca explained. "But if you're being denied access to marital assets, that could be grounds for a legal complaint." "What if he's preparing for divorce?" Rebecca studied my face carefully. "Isolde, is there something you're not telling me? Because the way you're describing Deacon's behavior, it sounds like he thinks he has grounds for divorce." I stirred my latte nervously. "He's been acting suspicious since Thomas was born, asking weird questions, being distant." "Questions about what?" I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. "Just questions about timing and genetics and things like that." Rebecca's expression grew serious. "Oh, Isolde, please tell me there isn't a paternity issue." "There's no issue," I said quickly. "Thomas is Deacon's son, but you know how people talk. especially when a baby doesn't look exactly like what they expected. What do you mean doesn't look like what they expected? I pulled out my phone and showed her the latest photos of Thomas. Rebecca studied them carefully, and I saw her expression change subtly. "He's beautiful," she said carefully. "Really striking features. But I can see why people might have questions. He doesn't really look like either you or Deacon." "Genetics can be unpredictable," I said, repeating the phrase I had been using for weeks. "They can be," Rebecca agreed. "But Isolde, if Deacon is suspicious enough to start controlling your finances, he might be planning more than just a conversation about paternity." That evening, I tried to act normal as Deacon and I went through our usual routine of dinner, baths, and bedtime stories. But I watched him carefully, looking for signs of what he might be planning. He was methodical in everything he did, checking his phone frequently and making notes in a small notebook that he kept in his shirt pocket. When Emily asked him to read her a second bedtime story, he agreed, but kept glancing at his watch as if he had somewhere else to be. After the children were asleep, Deacon disappeared into his office again. I could hear him on the phone, speaking in low tones that I couldn't decipher, even when I pressed my ear to the door. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to be direct. "Deacon," I said, knocking on his office door, "we need to talk." "I'm busy right now," he replied. "It's important." "So is what I'm doing." I tried the door handle, but it was locked. Deacon had never locked his office door before, not even when he was working on confidential client files. "Please," I said through the door, "I know you're upset about something, but we can work through this. We can talk about whatever is bothering you." The silence stretched on for so long that I thought he might not answer. Then I heard his chair creak as he stood up. "Isolde," he said, his voice muffled by the door, "I think it's better if we don't talk right now. I think it's better if we wait until I have all the information I need." "Information about what?" "About our marriage, about our family, about whether the life I thought I was living is actually real." His words hit me like ice water. "Deacon, please open the door. Please let's just talk about this." But I heard his chair creak again as he sat back down, and then the sound of his keyboard clicking as he resumed whatever work was so important that it couldn't wait. I stood outside his locked office door for another 10 minutes, hoping he would change his mind. But finally, I gave up and went to bed alone, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how my marriage had deteriorated so quickly. The next morning, Deacon was gone before I woke up. He had left another note about early meetings, but when I checked his dresser, I noticed that several of his work shirts were missing. Either he was doing a lot more laundry than usual, or he was keeping clothes somewhere else. That afternoon, while Thomas napped and Emily was at school, I decided to do some investigation of my own. I went through Deacon's home office, looking for clues about what kind of information he was gathering. Most of his files were work-related or household documents that I already knew about. But in the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a manila folder labeled Personal 2024. Inside were printouts of our cell phone bills with certain numbers highlighted in yellow, bank statements with specific transactions circled in red, and most disturbing of all, a timeline written in Deacon's careful handwriting that detailed my work schedule, my evening activities, and dates that corresponded to my pregnancy. At the bottom of the folder was a business card for a law firm I didn't recognize, with a handwritten appointment time for Thursday at 2 p.m. I sat in Deacon's desk chair, staring at the evidence of his methodical investigation into our marriage. He wasn't just suspicious, he was building a case. And from the look of his timeline, he had been gathering information for weeks. My hand shook as I put everything back exactly as I had found it. Because I realized that while I had been trying to save our marriage, Deacon had been preparing to end it. And based on what I had seen in that folder, he might have more evidence than I had realized. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning via certified mail, requiring my signature and leaving no doubt about its official nature. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead from Brennan, Walsh and Associates, requesting my presence at their downtown office the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. for a discussion regarding the Fenwick family situation. I stared at the letter for a long time, my coffee growing cold as I tried to process what was happening. Deacon had actually hired a lawyer. This wasn't just suspicion or hurt feelings. This was the beginning of legal action. When Deacon came home that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room with the letter in my hand. "We need to talk," I said. He looked at the letterhead and nodded. "I figured you'd get that today." "Deacon, what are you doing?" "I'm protecting myself and my daughter," he said simply, "and I'm finding out the truth about my son." The way he said "my son" made it clear that he was no longer certain Thomas was his. The doubt that had been growing for weeks had apparently crystallized into conviction. "You want a DNA test?" I said. It wasn't a question. "Among other things, yes." "What other things?" Deacon sat down across from me, his expression serious but not unkind. "Isolde, I know about Lionel." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as I tried to formulate a response, but nothing came out. "I know about the dinners, the late-night conversations, the text messages," Deacon continued. "I know about the evening in March when you told me you were working late, but you were actually at his apartment." How do I know?" Deacon pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. "Because I've been paying attention, because I installed tracking software on your phone after Thomas was born, and you started acting strange, because I followed you one night and saw you go into his building. I felt sick. You've been spying on me? I've been trying to understand why my wife was lying to me and why my newborn son looks nothing like me." The calm, methodical way he spoke was somehow worse than if he had been shouting. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This was a calculated response to what he saw as a calculated betrayal. "Deacon, I know how this looks, but..." "But what? But it's not what it seems. But you can explain everything." He leaned forward slightly. "Isolde, I have text messages between you and Lionel, talking about your feelings for each other. I have credit card receipts from restaurants you never told me about. I have GPS data showing you at his apartment when you said you were at the office." I opened my mouth to deny it, to explain, to somehow minimize what he had discovered. But the evidence was apparently overwhelming, and we both knew it. "The affair doesn't necessarily mean Thomas isn't yours," I said weakly. "No," Deacon agreed, "but it means I can't trust anything you tell me about Thomas's paternity, which is why we're going to let science decide." "And if the DNA test proves he's your son?" Deacon was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll deal with the affair. But if he's not..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. If Thomas wasn't his biological son, our marriage was over, and I would be facing divorce proceedings as a proven adulteress with a child from another relationship. "I want to go to this meeting with you," I said. "I want to hear what your lawyer has to say." "That's your choice. But Isolde, you should know that I'm not looking for reconciliation right now. I'm looking for clarity and protection." The meeting at Brennan, Walsh and Associates was everything I had feared it would be. Deacon's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Walsh, laid out the situation with clinical precision. "We're requesting an immediate paternity test for the minor child Thomas Fenwick," she explained, sliding papers across the conference table. "We're also documenting evidence of extramarital affair and requesting temporary separation of assets pending the outcome of paternity testing." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means that until we determine the biological father of your son, Mr. Fenwick will be maintaining separate finances and residence," Patricia explained. "It also means that if the child is determined not to be his biological offspring, Mr. Fenwick will not be responsible for child support or any other parental obligations." I looked at Deacon, sitting beside his lawyer with the same calm expression he had worn for weeks. "You're moving out?" "I moved out yesterday," he said quietly. "I'm staying at my mother's house until this is resolved." "What about Emily?" Emily will spend weekdays with you and weekends with me, unless you have objections to that arrangement. I wanted to object to all of it, the separation, the paternity test, the cold legal way he was dismantling our family. But I also knew that fighting would only make me look more guilty. How long does a paternity test take? I asked. With expedited processing, about a week, Patricia replied. We can arrange for the testing to be done this Friday if you're available. And if, I swallowed hard, if Thomas is Deacon's biological son, then we'll address the marital issues separately, Patricia said. But Mr. Fenwick wants to be clear that proof of paternity doesn't automatically resolve the trust issues in your marriage. Deacon spoke for the first time since the introductions. Isolde, I need you to understand something. Even if Thomas is my son, you lied to me. You had an affair. You made me question the paternity of my own child because of your choices. I never meant for any of this to happen, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But it did happen, Deacon replied, and now we have to deal with the consequences. The paternity test was scheduled for that Friday. A simple cheek swab for both Deacon and Thomas, processed at a certified laboratory with results guaranteed within 7 business days. As we left the lawyer's office, Deacon walked me to my car, but didn't offer any comfort or reassurance. I'll pick up Emily on Friday evening, he said, and I'll be there for the paternity test, obviously. Deacon, I said, I know you don't believe me right now, but I do love you. I love our family. He looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flash of the man I had married, but it was quickly replaced by that same guarded expression. I loved our family too, he said, but I'm not sure our family was ever what I thought it was. He got into his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with legal papers in my hand and the growing realization that my marriage might be over, regardless of what the DNA test revealed. Because even if Thomas was Deacon's biological son, the trust between us was broken, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. The DNA results arrived on a Wednesday morning, exactly 7 days after the testing. I knew they had arrived because Patricia Walsh called me at 8:47 a.m. to schedule an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Emergency meeting? I repeated, my heart pounding. Mr. Fenwick would like to discuss the results and finalize some arrangements, Patricia said in her crisp, professional tone. Can you be here at 2 p.m.? I spent the morning in a state of suspended animation, unable to eat or focus on anything except the envelope that was waiting for me at the law office. Thomas seemed to sense my anxiety, fussing more than usual and refusing to nap. I found myself studying his face obsessively, looking for any resemblance to Deacon that I might have missed. At 1:45 p.m., I sat in the parking lot outside Brennan Walsh & Associates, trying to gather the courage to walk inside. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Thinking of you today. Whatever happens, we'll get through this. But as I walked into the law office, I realized that getting through this might mean accepting a reality I wasn't prepared for. Deacon sat stone-faced at the conference table beside his lawyer, Patricia Walsh. She slid the paternity results across to me. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Deacon Fenwick is excluded as the biological father of Thomas Fenwick. The room went silent. Thomas wasn't Deacon's son. Patricia continued. Mr. Fenwick is proceeding with divorce. He seeks sole custody of Emily, no support for Thomas, and fair division of assets. Under state law, deception about paternity constitutes fraud. He has no legal obligation to another man's child. I turned to Deacon. Please, can we talk privately? We've talked enough, he said quietly. Lawyers and documents now. Patricia added a restraining order request. Mr. Fenwick prefers no direct contact during proceedings. I felt the room spin. That's extreme. You're manipulative, Deacon said. I don't trust myself around you. The meeting dragged on with timelines and filings, but I barely heard. My marriage was over. Thomas would grow up without the man he thought was his father. Emily would be caught in the crossfire. Afterward, in my car, I called Lionel. The test proves Thomas isn't Deacon's. You're his father. A long pause. Isolde, we were never committed. It was a mistake. I'm not looking to be a father or get involved. He hung up. That evening, a courier delivered final divorce papers, custody agreement, and restraining order. Tucked inside was Deacon's handwritten note. Isolde, I'm sorry it ended this way. I hope you and Thomas find happiness. Please don't contact me again. Deacon. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. The divorce decree, signed and final. Attached was a financial statement, half our assets transferred to me, the house deed in my name, scrupulously fair. But one line stood out. Child support for Thomas Fenwick, 0.0 roans, paternity legally disclaimed. Deacon had given me everything I was legally entitled to as his ex-wife, but he'd ensured Thomas received nothing from the man who'd been his father for 2 months. I sat in my living room, surrounded by papers, holding my son and facing an uncertain future as a single mother. My choices had cost Thomas the only father he'd ever known. While I clung to hope for reconciliation, Deacon had spent weeks building an airtight case, protecting himself from the consequences of my lies. He got a clean break. I was left to raise our son alone, knowing the family we'd built was founded on deception.